Well, let me start by saying buenos dias. Good morning. I am so overjoyed to be here today as kind of a final moment of this time in Fresno, but not my last time in Fresno. I've had such a moving weekend here with many of you. You've inspired me in ways I'm not sure that you quite understand, and given me hope, even in the face of so much that we're going through. To be at a Unitarian church, my grandparents were lifelong Unitarians, and were members of the Unitarian Church in Madison, Wisconsin, that was built by Frank Lloyd Wright. And it had light coming in just like this. And it was a place where light and life and love could come in and flow out. And a sense that it was not a sanctuary that was built to protect or divide or isolate, but actually was meant as a place where all could come, be refreshed, and go and continue to be part of a broader community. So I feel very welcomed here. Thank you, Reverend Tim, for your welcome. And thank you to the entire community in Fresno for such a really marvelous weekend. And I'm gonna single him out again because Jim Grant has just done such a great job. Where's Jim? Is he here somewhere? Yeah. Listen, this is your last year doing it, so you're not going to get this kind of praise next time I come, but I do want to recognize what an important role you've played. So this morning's sermon is titled, Shall Christian Nationalists Win? The Critical Role of Congregations in Protecting Our Diverse Democracy. I want to focus on the power that we have in our spiritual and religious communities that is absolutely crucial for meeting the current moment. The title of my talk is a reference to a sermon preached in 1922 by Harry Emerson Fosdick at First Presbyterian Church in New York City. It was titled, Shall the Fundamentalists Win? It was one of the most famous Christian sermons in the country and was referenced for decades later because there was such a concern among many Christians that there was this group of their fellow co-religionists that were so fixated on scriptural inerrancy, apocalyptic worldviews, and intolerant of dissent. Well, Reverend Fosdick was kicked out of his church for preaching that sermon. However, it was a serious sermon and an important sermon. However, the religious and theological concerns that Fosdick addressed in the 1920s only hinted at the adverse effect that Christian fundamentalism had on society in the early 20th century and in the decades since. A century later, we are faced with an even more serious threat. One that takes the theological language of Christian fundamentalism and grafts it onto a ruthless political machine intent on using the power of the state to enforce its worldview on the entire society. So I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about what Christian nationalism is. It's an ideology. It's a quest for power and a lens through which a growing number of Americans view their role in our society. It is not new, but recent events, specifically January 6th, where people were waving Jesus banners and holding up crosses as they rushed the Capitol, killed people, and devastated a moment of transition, peaceful transition of power in an attempt to thwart our democracy. Christian nationalism has its roots in the dangerous myth that we were founded as a Christian nation and that Christianity holds a privileged place in our nation that must be preserved at all costs. They use Christian rhetoric of the Christian nation with its underpinnings of white supremacy, xenophobia, patriarchy, and authoritarianism to dictate who is a true American and who will be relegated to perennial outsider status. The goal of Christian nationalism is the consolidation of power in the hands of an exclusive religious and political movement that is using the churches, the courts, and increasingly electoral politics to gain power over the majority of American people. The goal of Christian nationalism is the establishment of a theocracy. Unfortunately, Christian nationalism is not relegated to the shadowed corners of our country. A poll recently released by Public Religion Research Institute indicates that close to 30% of Americans are either adherents or sympathetic to Christian nationalism. And among white evangelical Protestant, that number jumps to nearly 2 out of 3. Over 1 in 4 Americans believe that the United States should declare itself a Christian nation. As journalist and author Catherine Stewart recently wrote in The New Republic, Christian nationalists are increasingly framing their efforts as a spiritual battle that resonates with many of its Pentecostal or charismatic followers. Christian nationalism puts the power of Jesus, their side, versus the power of Satan, which it will not surprise all of you is all of us. The spiritualization of political power introduces a zero-sum game into politics, in which compromise is capitulation, and which nothing less than God's favor is at stake. And these stakes lead to violence. And violence is acceptable in Christian nationalist worldview, who approve of using violence to gain their means at 7 times the rate of average Americans. Nearly 1 in 5 Americans assert that not only is the United States a white Christian nation, but they are willing to fight to preserve it. If you are alarmed, you are paying attention. Because we should be alarmed. But that does not mean we need to lose hope. It does mean that we need to be aware and that we need to be responsive and we need to get busy. The good news is, as of now, Christian nationalism continues to be unpopular. 70% of Americans reject the call to declare America a Christian nation. Close to 75% of Americans say they prefer a country made up of a diversity of faiths, not just Christianity. 80% of Americans reject the idea that Christians should exercise dominion over all areas of American society. Christian nationalist views on race, gender, immigration, and LGBTQ people are also unpopular and out of step with the American public. Good news. Yeah, you can clap for that. Yet we are in a crucial moment to make sure that this does not grow, that these numbers do not change, and that political organizing on the other side, on the part of a small minority, does not overwhelm us. It will take all of us to counteract the influence of Christian nationalist ideology and defend our democracy. Spiritual and religious congregations like this one will play a critical role because of the power you have. And I'm just going to say a word about power. Patti Smith says, people have the power. It's okay to have power. It's how we use it. We need to be thinking in terms of the power we have. In this moment, when civic spaces and where people traditionally congregate, such as public schools, higher education, and libraries, are being hollowed out intentionally by people who distrust civic spaces, the physical campuses that house spiritual and religious congregations can serve as welcoming locations where people can continue to come together and find common ground, common purpose. Isolation and separation are the enemies of democracy. When we come together and grow in trust and understanding, we build a powerful inoculation against a culture of demonization and distrust in which Christian nationalism thrives. Many congregations, including this one, are already playing this role. And it would be powerful to see an interconnecting map of Fresno with dozens, maybe even hundreds of stars, signifying spiritual and religious communities that are destinations where diverse civic life is valued, and people from every background are invited to come together and know one another. In addition to locations when we can draw people in, congregations have networks to send people out for rapid mobilization and response. Congregations are people, and again, people are power. If a local temple, mosque, or other community has been targeted by bigotry and violence, as is increasingly the case, congregations like this one can bring out people to offer solidarity and support within hours. In addition to moments of crisis, congregations have the power to mobilize a diverse group of religious and spiritual people from a wide range of traditions to show up side by side in public forums, community rallies, to the voting booth, sending a clear signal to our elected officials and to our neighbors that we reject the exclusivist claims of Christian nationalism and demand that this community be a place where people of all faiths and all backgrounds are treated equally under the law. Congregations can also provide a hub of reliable information sharing and education. Knowledge is power. And congregations are places of learning about spiritual traditions and practices, but also about the world in which we live. Reading books together, watching films, educating ourselves about our country's history and the experience of diverse Americans in an environment of open inquiry is more important now than ever, when there is so much disinformation at work. As we know, Christian nationalists are attempting to erase our history with book bans and restriction on African American study AP courses. We need to mobilize to reverse those efforts, but also in the meantime, the learning can go on inside of our congregations. I know one pastor in Florida who is organizing an accredited African American Studies AP course in his church, for which the students will receive credit. In a conversation I had with a Christian theologian, Diana Butler Bash, she suggested that every congregation should look at the banned book list in their local community and buy those books. And put them in their library, in the congregation, for people to invite people in and show them there's nothing to be afraid of in hearing a diverse set of voices. As I was writing this sermon, a seminary classmate of mine posted that she was reading from her church's banned book brunch selection, which I was like, I just, people are being creative right now. This is tragic that it has come to this. But it does call upon a great part of the religious tradition in America where congregations have been a place of resistance, as well as location where truth is protected and shared. Perhaps the greatest contribution of congregations to this effort will not be what, but how we will approach the struggle against Christian nationalism. I confess to you that Christian nationalism and the people who are its followers really frighten me. As a gay man with a husband and 2 children, I hear the words they use to talk about me, and I fear what they would do to my family. And I find my hand balling into a fist as I prepare for the fight ahead. One of the ongoing conversations from this weekend has been what it means to win or lose in this struggle against Christian nationalism. In my talk on Friday, I used militaristic language such as defeat when talking about the fight ahead. We are in a dangerous situation. I would say existential situation for our democracy. And we need to be heads up about the threat. However, it is worth considering how we shall engage this struggle so that we do not become that which we hate. This is perhaps the most important role that congregations from all religious traditions can play in this current moment. I want to share a passage from my own Christian tradition, 1 Corinthians 13. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and angels but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all the mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but I do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I might boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way, it is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. And now faith and hope and love abide, these 3. The greatest of these is love. This reading that is so recognizable to many of us from the weddings was not actually about love between 2 people. It was written to an early Christian church in Corinth that was divided by issues of class, gender, background, and different ways to practice their faith. Earlier in the letter, Paul attempts to persuade the church how much they need each other, and that the diversity within their church was part of what made them the followers of Christ. And in this passage, he acknowledges that there are many ways for followers of Jesus to practice their faith, but there is only one characteristic that is most important, and that is love. One more confession. Yeah, I definitely clap. And now I'm going to confess. When I hear about love, when I feel angry or threatened, as I do about Christian nationalism, it is hard to contain the eye roll. I mean, come on. Love. However, when I look to the spiritual leaders I admire the most, they talk about love. Yesterday, our local teacher, guru, where's Dr. Kapoor? Are you here? Where are we? Oh, right there, Dr. Kapoor. Led us in a pledge against hate and invited us to read the wisdom from Gandhi, who said, "The nectar of love alone can destroy the poison of hate." And Gandhi's student, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who told us, "Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden." And Nelson Mandela said, "No one is born hating another person because of the color of their skin or background or his religion. People learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than the opposite." The challenges Christian nationalism poses to our country are grave, but they are no more grave than what Dr. King, Mahatma Gandhi, or Nelson Mandela faced. They chose love because they looked into the deep well of their spiritual traditions and they saw that the path of love offered the greatest resources and tactics that would eventually lead to the future they longed for. The opportunity is for us to do the same, and it starts in a way that is very personal. And the local congregation can help each of us learn how we can access the love in our own spirits, hearts, and minds. How do we learn the discipline of love? Because it is hard to learn. It requires practice. But as so many of our spiritual forebears remind us, it can be done. And we will be strong with our love. Each diverse congregation will call upon its particular wisdom, which is the beauty of this, and we can learn from one another as other traditions of love become a source of power for all of us. We can also learn the collective practice of love, which is nonviolence resistance. I did an interview with Representative John Lewis about his time in the civil rights movement, and he told me that people had to be trained in nonviolence before they were ever allowed to go out to a protest. Our congregations can be a place where we can learn the deep roots of nonviolent protest and show up with love and the power of love, even as we resist the powers that would demean or destroy us. Congregations will also bring the love, the banner of love, into our wider community and democracy. Dr. Cornel West has said that justice is what love looks like in public, and we can bring that justice, love with us, and we can bring that love, that justice into our democracy. Love can and must be our guide, our tactic, our power, as our congregations mobilize in this great challenge to our democracy. And I believe that love will overcome hate, that love will overcome fear, that love will overcome division, that love will overcome Christian nationalism. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall and we must overcome. Amen.